Hi, everyone. My name is Karen Hurd. I want to welcome you to Better Brains, Better Kids. This is going to be a talk on nutrition and brain function in children. And before we get started, I wanted to just give you a little bit of my story and my background. I am a mom to 5. Most of my children are now grown. I still have one at home, and a grandmother to 2, with one more on the way. And I have been a wellness educator, partnered with Shackley for over 21 years now. And I came to this because I was one of those kids that was an undiagnosed ADD child. Back in the day, before microwave ovens and cell phones, it was thought that ADD was really rare. And they used to actually call it hyperkinesis. And that it was really only in boys. But here I was, that child that was raising her hand too much, seemed to do good work when she wanted to, remembered things when she wanted to, talked too much, asked too many questions, had very rapid speech, and bounced all over the place. And I was told what a lot of kids were told to do: settle down, pay attention, all that kind of stuff. And it really wasn't until my later adulthood, actually in my late 30s, that I was actually formally diagnosed as ADD. And then all of a sudden, a lot of things in my story made sense. Well, I had 5 children, and some of their behavior was confusing too. And I would tell them the same things I was told: settle down, pay attention. And as it turned out, a number of my children, who knows where it came from, right, are also ADD as well. And so in that search, I used to work with educational toys. And in the search for understanding my own children better, I happened upon a book called Solving the Puzzle of Your Hard to Raise Child by Dr. William Crook. And everything he said in there made sense. And he was talking about gut health and the way nutrition and gut impact brain, and then how that impacted behavior and school performance. And I felt like a whole new world had opened up, that had gotten some answers, but I didn't know where to go to there. Fast forward a few years down the road, and I became a wellness educator, partnered with Shackley in part to help other parents with the same issues that we were struggling with. So what we're going to talk about today is whether behavior is what I call brain driven, or whether a child's maybe just being disobedient, or a kid. I don't like to see families struggle. I think labels, we talk sometimes about how labels are not helpful and we shouldn't use them. But a lot of times they give us a framework and a way to understand things, and we can take it from there. So I don't like to see families or kids being judged because they're working on the wrong end of the problem, because they don't know anything better to do. So hopefully we will bring some clarification to that. Let's go ahead and start with the brain. Healthy brain development. The brain is the most demanding organ in the body. It uses over half of the sugar energy, or glucose, in your body. I mean, the brain is incredibly complex and it's very demanding. Too little glucose and not enough neurotransmitters are produced, and the communication within the brain breaks down. And don't we see this when somebody's hungry and they're kind of grumpy and they can't think well? All right. Your brain is 50% fat. A lot of that fat is something called DHA. It's a fatty acid. It is the most abundant. It's got a really long name, by the way. I'm not even going to try to pronounce it. It is the most abundant omega-3 fatty acid in the cell membranes in the brain. Here's a tip. Your brain cannot store energy. Your muscles can store energy. Fat is an energy store, but brain needs a steady stream of glucose and nutrients throughout the day. You can automatically think about, can't you, about how we eat in our country, especially how kids eat. No morning snack really after about age 5, right after kindergarten, and no afternoon snack. And yet we need this steady stream of glucose throughout the day. Hormones such as insulin and ghrelin, those are hormones. Hormones are chemical messengers, mostly made in the glands, affect memory and learning. And what's really interesting is Alzheimer's. Several years ago, people being research scientists, started calling Alzheimer's type 3 diabetes because of the way the blood sugar impacted brain function. and inflammation. And ghrelin, you might know this as the hunger hormone. When you're hungry, it's ghrelin at work. And they're learning that ghrelin is one of those hormones that really impacts brain memory. Have you ever had, for example, you've eaten a food and you didn't know you had a virus, and then you get violently ill afterwards, and your brain remembers that and says, that's it, we're not eating chocolate pudding again. I eat that, I get sick, no dice. But they're also, that's one of the ways ghrelin works in memory, but they're also seeing that ghrelin might improve brain function. Especially with, that's why some people are looking at intermittent fasting for brain function. So these are really, it's really interesting how all of this information is exploding. But ghrelin and insulin are just some of the hormones that are impacted directly by diet and exercise. You have over 1 million neural connections created in your child's brain in the first few years of life. That's about birth to age 3. And it used to be they thought that you were born with all the brain cells you were ever going to have. Now we know that that's not the case. You actually, after birth, really increase in the number of brain cells till about middle childhood, maybe 8, 9 years of age. And then later, closer to the teen years, the brain begins pruning and eliminated unneeded connections to increase brain efficiency. This brain development, and people didn't know how to describe it, but they knew that children could absorb a tremendous amount of information. This is why a lot of times there's a push to get kids to study more than one language when they're younger, do a lot of memory work when they're younger, to really work on the studies when they're younger. Obviously, there's a balance between utilizing a child's brain development and unnecessarily or pressuring them detrimentally, because as the brain gets older in adolescence, it goes through pruning. And it's getting rid of unneeded connections to increase efficiency. Here's another example. My background is Polish. My mother's side was Polish. And the Polish folks, that my Polish relatives that came over to the United States, there's no TH sound. They can't say that. And so when they would learn English, they could only say that. And that's a function of the fact that there was no TH sound in Polish. So the brain shed that ability. It didn't need it, right? That's how your brain becomes efficient. We add neural connections through our lifetime, nowhere near at the rate of early childhood and around the time of your prenatal development, but you can add neural connections throughout your lifetime. Interestingly enough, and you see this in Failure to Thrive, right? Early childhood, strong emotional bonds increase brain development and cognitive, which means thinking skills. So love builds brain cells. And this is why sometimes you'll see people who will do volunteer work going and cuddling newborns in a hospital because mom and dad can't be there all the time, especially children who have extended hospital stays. This is why hugs and touch are so very important to people as a rule, but especially to young children. So let's talk a little bit about what this pruning means. It's the growth of synapses continues until mid to late childhood. I like to use my hands as kind of like brain cells. I could just add brain cells, right? And they kind of, your brain, this is like the neuron, and you have these things called dendrites, and you have a gap, I don't know if you can see it in my hands, between the two. That gap is called the synapse. And so in the brain, messengers will come down one dendrite, jump the synapse over to the other one. Kind of how your brain communicates. So the growth of synapses continues until mid to late childhood. Yes, I'm a bit of a science geek. In adolescence, the streamlining of these neural circuits could explain the increased cognitive, remember that means thinking skills, ability in late teens or early 20s. And don't you see this, maybe you've experienced this yourself, where you're really struggling maybe in middle school and early high school to understand something. Maybe it's in science or maybe it's in math, and maybe in your 20s, all of a sudden it just seems to make sense. That's that pruning. That's that increased cognitive ability that happens. And then in your 20s, you start experiencing by slight degrees cognitive decline. So you're actually at your peak in your 20s. Abnormal problems in pruning could explain why some of these major mental illnesses emerge in adolescence. Schizophrenia is one of those that emerges in late adolescence or early 20s, and it could be, so now they're looking at pruning as one of the physiological things that happens in mental illness. It also could explain why traumatic brain injury is difficult to recover from. You have a lack of redundant pathways, redundant meaning kind of repeat or more than one way to do something. For example, I had a child who needed speech, had an articulation disorder, could not get the words out. And when this child was younger, like 3 years old, we had this child in speech development. And the speech therapist, I said, do you need to know why this articulation disorder is happening? She says, no, I just have to repattern the brain. What she was basically, and she said, I can do that pretty easily. And she could, because now I understand why. The brain had all these neural connections it was making. And while it was building, she was helping to create these redundant pathways to increase the ability to speak. And that's why younger children, if they need any corrective things like speech development, speech therapy rather, doing that in their younger years is really important. All right, let's talk about neurotransmitters. What are they? They are really chemical messengers released by the nerve cell to another nerve cell, and the name for nerve cells are neurons. They stimulate brain, gland, or muscle cell, and they travel through the nervous system. I think a lot of times we think of neurotransmitters as only in your brain. They're actually throughout your nervous system. There are 4 classes of neurotransmitters. 3 are made from amino acids. That's a building block of protein. And 1 class comes from something called choline, and that's a compound found in different fruits and foods. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Just know that neurotransmitters have 2 basic functions. Now, this can be really, really complex, and I know that I don't want to go too deep. Imagine that we're looking at the woods, right? And we see different trees, we see some flowers and some plants, but we're not digging down into the root structure of the tree too much. But we're not going into super detail, but I want you to have a basic understanding, because this will play into our discussion on nutrition and why it's so important, all right, later on. So there's 2 basic functions that these neurotransmitters do. One is excite. They signal for more action, like wake up, like think faster, run, do this, eat, hunger, that kind of thing. And they inhibit. They slow or stop action. An example is one called GABA. That's G-A-B-A. It has a very long name, but it's shortened to GABA. And they think that in anxiety, it's not inhibiting the neurotransmitters that say stop fear. So basically, I'm just being like really a big overview. So in the other function of neurotransmitters is to inhibit, slow, or stop an action. There is a class of neurotransmitters, and believe it or not, you know these. They're called monoamines. You see that word amine, meaning from amino acids, and they are involved in the brain in attention, cognition, and emotion. And you know a couple of these already. Have you ever heard of somebody needing to check Facebook or email all the time because you get a quick dopamine hit? That's how it can become addicting, by the way. Your brain gets a quick reward of dopamine. Dopamine is a monoamine. You hear it, dopamine, a monoamine, right? Another one is serotonin, is a monoamine. It's involved in regulation of mood. There's another class of neurotransmitters called acetylcholine, and you see that coming from the choline up here. And that's a neurotransmitter involved in memory, alertness, attention, and muscular function. It's one of those neurotransmitters that's really used throughout the central nervous system. A lot of transmitters have specific roles, and acetylcholine has multiple roles. It's very, very important. Neurotransmitters in the brain regulate mood, memory, focus, cravings, addictions, sleep, pain perception is just some of their roles. So let's talk a little bit about addictions. They're looking now at, when I say they, I mean research scientists, neuroscientists, that kind of thing. They're looking at addictions now as really a function of a flaw in how the neurotransmitters are working or not working. Too much, too little, not enough, it's not communicating. And I just want to stop here for a second on addictions. You're looking at dopamine, that's the reward. And in addiction, there's a lot of dopamine on that addictive behavior, and there's not necessarily a neural pathway in the what we would call non-addictive behavior. So part of the challenge in addiction recovery is to help regulate the dopamines and work on brain health, as well as the other things that somebody who's recovering from an addiction needs to do. Pain perception, real quick on addiction too, there was a book called The Mood Cure, and it came out in the 90s. And this particular psychologist, she had a clinic where, a residential clinic, and she was working with cocaine addiction. And cocaine is a highly addictive substance. You can get addicted really on one use. And sometimes when you've talked to perhaps people who've been recovered from cocaine addiction, or you hear people describe why they like cocaine, they'll talk about being alive and alert and engaged. And it was interesting. One of the things she discovered was that cocaine addicts were very low in a neurotransmitter that worked with alertness. Isn't that interesting? So what she did was created a program of supplementation and nutrition, specifically targeting that neurotransmitter, and she had a 96% success rate, which was unheard of in cocaine recovery. So it's absolutely amazing. Pain perception, you've heard of like I think epinephrine, norepinephrine, and pain perception. They're thinking now, for example, that fibromyalgia, because there's not really an injury, that it might be a function of the brain misperceiving pain when there isn't one. Now, the person who has it experiences pain. Their neurotransmitters are saying you're in pain. There's just no physiological source of pain. So they're thinking now that it's really just a neurotransmitter issue. So you can see in something when things go wrong, how powerful neurotransmitters are. And up to 86% of Americans, according to, I think it's the American Journal of Psychology, have suboptimal levels of neurotransmitters. And so we really got a bit of a crisis. Let's talk about some brain food. There are 3 classes that are made from, those 3 classes we talked about, including the monoamines, are made from amino acids, and that comes directly from protein sources. You have, 9 essential amino acids, and essential means you must eat it. If you don't eat it, the other amino acid chains in your body will not happen. They won't be made. So that's why it's very important to have balanced protein. The other class, acetylcholine, remember that was the one that worked both with brain and muscle, comes from meats, beef liver, and legumes. There's some other sources, but those are the primary ones. And I don't know how many of you are feeding your kids beef liver. How many of your kids go, woohoo, liver and onions? Then if you do use beef liver, please do use grass-fed, pasture-raised cows and not the industrially or conventionally raised beef liver, because of the way those animals are raised. Those livers are very toxic. And so the pasture-raised liver from small farms is much healthier. So if you're going to incorporate that in your kids' diet, I know they're excited. It's a very good source of choline. Energy from glucose. Remember, your brain demands half of the glucose energy in your bloodstream. That comes from the sugars in your diet, not the cookies in your diet, not the Pop-Tarts in your diet. It comes from whole grains, fruits, and vegetables. And then we can't not talk about brain food without talking about healthy fats. There's a couple things to know about healthy fats. One, they influence hormone production in your glands. Cholesterol is considered a mother hormone, so neurotransmitters come from it. And your reproductive hormones, a lot of your hormones come from cholesterol. That comes from healthy fat. Your body manufactures it, right? It doesn't necessarily all come from your diet. It comes from what you eat. Healthy fats also help with nutrient absorption, memory, attention, and cognition. And some sources of monounsaturated, that's what you need, are like avocado, olive oil, nuts, seeds. Those are also called the omega-3s and the omega-6 and the DHA. I do want to say a word about saturated fat. Coconut oil, by the way, is saturated fat. and the fat from red meat, is that studies are showing that saturated fat actually decreases cognitive function. And in America, we have very high red meat diets. So I'm not anti-meat. We enjoy a good steak in our house, but we do have to limit it. And let's talk about some other factors in brain function and development. The lack of parental connection or affection is huge. Remember, love builds brain cells. I think part of that lack of parental connection or affection is toxic stress, right? It creates a toxic stress in the child. This would also be kids who were raised perhaps in abusive environments, maybe perhaps bullied in school or in other situations, or maybe they've experienced a natural disaster, maybe an unexpected death in the family or that kind of thing. So all kinds of sources of toxic stress can hinder brain development, especially in higher order skills. And I would say if this was unaddressed, right? We can't completely avoid toxic stress, and that's why taking care of yourself and taking care of your children during stressful times really is very important. Prenatal environment, very important in brain function and development, not only mama nutrition and dad's nutrition, by the way, at the time of insemination, but does mom drink? Does mom smoke? Does mom do drugs? Is mom under toxic stress? That prenatal environment is really going to impact brain health and brain function. Socioeconomic environment, lower income children, just as a whole, there's going to be exceptions and there's ways to compensate. But as a whole, they're being hindered in their brain development and brain function. Immune function, there's increasing correlations between brain function and immune function. The physical environment of your child, we'll talk a little bit more about that later. Media consumption. You know, one of the problems with media consumption is it can short circuit the brain. Your brain does not need to be used. It's an extraordinarily passive activity. And how many of you remember Sesame Street? I don't know, I know it's still around, but in the beginning, when Sesame Street was, they would like flash the numbers, right? 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, A, B, C, 1, 2, 3. And kids would pick it up real quick, and the rapid pace would affect the child's ability to learn. Later on, they thought that maybe it was a contributing factor to the increase they were seeing in ADD-type behaviors in children because the brain did not have to work for the information. This is why handwriting versus typing is important, all right? Keyboarding's great, but your kids really don't need computer literacy skills. They need fine motor skills from handwriting, building, Play-Doh. All of that is brain development. You do a whole seminar on how to work with brain development that way. One of the reasons why I did not allow my children to use calculators for a long time is I wanted their brain to be patterned, okay? Physical activity, numerous studies, we're going to talk about that. Positive stress is actually good. So we can't just say stress is bad. There's different kinds of stress, different levels of resiliency in people. So we know long-term toxic stress, unaddressed and not any compensation for that, can hinder brain development. Positive stress can help brain development. That's why it's not bad if your kid struggles with something sometimes, all right? Especially if they're being supported through that process. Any child is affected by the environment, the toxic load, which can come from chemicals in the home or school or wherever, as well as the chemicals in their food and stress. Nutrition. Healthy cells make healthy cells, and sick cells make sick cells. It might seem that really obvious, but I think a lot of times we think that a sick cell, that the cells are sometimes reproduced independent. They make copies of each other. So a sick cell, at the time it replicates itself, is replicating itself in its current status, right? That's why you want to overwhelm the body with healthy cells. And that's where sickness comes from, by the way. The body's overwhelmed with sick cells. Healthy weight. Overweight children, unfortunately, have lower test scores. Genetics are about 20% of our health picture. You can impact how they express or show up by your nutrition, by the environment, by your stress factors. Special needs children, usually they just flat out have higher needs because of increased insensitivity to environment, nutrition, genetics, and sometimes immune needs. All right, does any of this sound like your child? Now, you might look at that and say, well, yeah, all kids are like that. Absolutely true. A lot of kids are going to act argumentative or spoiled sometimes, and they might act lethargic. They might be a picky eater, right? They might have to go to their face with the only thing they're going to eat is bread or chicken nuggets, right? I think how many kids have a chicken nugget face? But we're not talking about the occasional behavior. We're not talking about a lot of kids wet the bed as they're learning how to toilet train. We're really talking about at a certain age when it's physiologically their bladder's developed and they should be able to stay dry throughout the night, and for some reason they can't. You might be looking at a brain function issue. Argumentative or spoiled, yes, a child can be disobedient and mouthy once in a while, but is this child continually argumentative or spoiled? And it doesn't seem to matter what discipline you do. Maybe they're resistant to praise, they just cannot receive praise. Frequent nightmares. Nightmares can sometimes be directly diet related. I know of a child, when this child eats dairy, there's a nightmare that night. That's how mom knows whether or not there was dairy in the child's diet. Low self-esteem, especially in the child who has a positive, affirming environment, and sometimes that can often be a brain health issue. Fatigue, trouble learning is an obvious one. Food cravings can be your child needs better nutrition and takes unsafe risks. This would be the child that seems to be the daredevil and doesn't seem to respond to consequences. So let's talk about how brain health impacts behavior. We learned a little bit about these neurotransmitters and the glucose level, the brain needing the energy, and the brain needing a good diet. When it doesn't get those things, it is not functioning well, it is not communicating well, the pruning might be affected, and the growth of neurons and those connections between the brains are going to be affected. So you could see, for example, increased aggression, which gets exacerbated, by the way, by puberty, by hormones in boys. They can be. You see an inability or an inconsistency to listen or obey. Again, kids do this, right? And sometimes it happens. But it's when you feel like this child never seems to get it. It's when this child, you've got the reminders and they don't seem to work. You've got all these systems in place, and it seems to become the thing that the family starts to focus on. You're probably looking at a brain and behavior issue, not just standard childhood behavior. Same thing with forgetfulness. Every child forgets sometimes. They get involved in play or they get involved in something. It's part of the maturation process. It's when is the forgetfulness become an issue in this child's life or in this family. Same thing with fear or anxiety. Every child is afraid sometimes. Their brains don't always process events or situations well. But are they overly anxious? They don't ever seem to calm down. They're anxious about things that are normal occurrences in their life. You're probably looking at a brain-driven behavior versus something that's just a phase. They're overly concerned about details or the order in which things will happen, not just once in a while, in a consistent area, or all the time. And I think an unusual fear, different from fear or anxiety, the child might be afraid of a noise, for example, maybe a truck sound. And this puts terror in the child. And basically what's happening is the child is not in their central nervous system processing the sound as a truck. It sounds very different to them, and their brain literally is not finding a placeholder for that. Not understanding or caring about consequences. We're not talking about the average immaturity. We're talking about overall a pervasive sense that this child is a daredevil. Child is breaking arms, getting cuts a lot, more so than just active. And it's kind of like where you're listening to your gut sense, all right? And it's when people say, well, you just got it, and you're like, no, it's different. You're probably looking at brain behavior. Let's take a moment to talk about children and medication. I know that this is a sensitive topic for people. I know that you may be watching this and you already have a child on medication or you're considering medication. I am not here to say never use medication. There may be times it's absolutely an appropriate way to help your child be successful in life. I think there's a concern overall that children are over-medicated. I was reading an article in the New York Times in 2013. I happen to remember it. And they were talking about doctors who were working with children in low poor kids, poverty. I think it was in New York City. And a lot of these doctors were just going right to the ADD meds. They were just going right to the Ritalin and the Adderall and all that kind of stuff for these children, rather than work with the nutrition, rather than work with mom and the child on behavior modification or other approaches, right to the drugs, because it was an easy way to control this child's behavior. Right? That would be an example of over-medicating where medication was perhaps not needed. So at least 1 million children under the age of 5 are on psychotropic drugs. Some estimates are as high as 1% of children under the age of 5. That's a lot of kids. And these drugs are heavy duty. We're talking not just the ADD drugs, but we're talking about drugs to treat bipolar. All right, drugs to treat paranoia, other kinds of issues. And the question is, not do some children need them, because they very well may, but are the number of children on these drugs, does it exceed what would be the expected number of children to have that mental health issue? Are they just medicating because they don't know what else to do? This kind of broke my heart. 0 to 1 year, babies, infants, 274,000, almost 275,000 children on this kind of medication, up to 20% of school-age children. Now, isn't it interesting, Karen's little rant here, you can't send vitamins into your child's school, but they can go to the nurse's clinic and get a psychotropic drug. I had one client whose child was eventually diagnosed with pervasive developmental disorder, which sometimes is just a catch-all for, we don't get it, we don't know why. And we had the child on Omega Guard, which is something that I will talk about a little bit later. And the teacher was literally kept it in her desk and snuck it to the child, because when he was getting the Omega Guard, he could stay in class, he could focus. But one time, mom wanted to save a little bit of money, right? She wanted to save like $2 or $3 on the bottle. And she just put this other brand in the Omega Guard and sent it off to school. And the teacher was sneaking it to the child. I mean, they could have both gotten into a lot of trouble. The teacher could have gotten into a lot of trouble for doing this, but I want to make my point about nutrition. And the child wasn't doing as well. And the teacher writes mom and says, what changed? And what changed is mom used a different brand, and they could tell. In teens, some of these drugs have a reverse effect. The official name is a paradoxical effect. And that would be an increasing anger, aggression, violence, suicide, alienation. Some of these drugs will make a child feel like they can't connect to people. They will feel very different and cut off from other kids. I had somebody tell me a story about a family who was in an anger management class because they felt like they had to medicate their child because the behavior was coming out of control, and the child did have nutritional issues, and there was a compliance. It was really hard for this family. Well, when they put this child on medication, suddenly the behaviors went out of control. The child was threatening violence, had never done that before. Very aggressive, very difficult to control. And so now all of a sudden they're in anger management classes, and this mom was heartbroken, and she's sharing this story with me. And what was interesting, though, is when the child, who was in middle school at the time, went to their group, their anger management group, saw a lot of kids from school. They were all with the same psychiatrist and all taking similar medication. It was really eye-opening when I heard that story from her. So when we say a paradoxical effect, Ritalin's a very good example. In adults, it's a stimulant. It's like, it makes you react faster, makes you more alert. In children who are true ADD, it can help them focus and calm them down. That's a paradoxical effect. If you really feel like you need to do some medication, you've come to that conclusion for yourself, please do check the FDA black box warnings. These are warnings that talk about, and some of these kids get into suicidal ideation, which means they think about killing themselves. And there are drugs that can cause that. Sometimes when a child commits suicide, and there's just, where did this come from? You may find oftentimes that child was on medication. But there are over 8,389,034 children in these United States on psychiatric drugs. That's much, much higher than in years past. So let's talk about maybe some things we can do to help these kids either lessen the side effects of medication if they really need to be on it, or maybe if they don't need medication, I'll give moms some options here. The Action for Healthy Kids is a great website. They did an analysis of over 200 studies on exercise, and they showed an increase in cognitive function. Kids learn facts and skills better. And aren't we seeing a problem with lack of exercise with children? And in the schools in Texas are actually going back to adding morning and afternoon recess. When I went to school back in the day before microwave ovens and cell phones, we had a morning recess, a lunch recess, an afternoon recess, and sometimes if the teacher couldn't get the kids under control, recess, and we just played. There was a huge understanding that kids needed recess. Now in the school system in my locality, they got to the point where it was just gym. Gym is not the same as recess. Kids need to play and run and get their action out, all right? Overweight children do not perform as well as healthy weight children in academics. How about if some of these kids got more exercise and different diets? What if that was the only reason why their grades were what they were? Poor nutrition, inactivity, and weight problems caused more school absences than other physical, psychological, or social problems. Many school and learning problems have simple, natural solutions. That is the good news. So it doesn't really matter what we do. In 1997, this was an interesting case study. Central Alternative High School, and you hear alternative high school, you know that these are kids who didn't fit into a conventional high school, probably behavior problems or maybe learning disabilities that impacted their behavior. They replaced standard school lunches with healthy, fresh foods and water as a beverage. What were the results? Grades were up. Truancy was no longer a problem. Arguments were rare. Teachers could teach instead of disciplining students. So class time was not spent in controlling behavior. It was spent in teaching and instruction. 5 years later, the results were the same. So this just wasn't something that happened one time. And more schools have done this. And it's shown that schools that focus on nutrition, non-toxic environments, and exercise have similar results. Not a fad. So what are you feeding your child's brain? Breakfast is absolutely key to school performance. Pop-Tarts aren't breakfast. Cheerios aren't breakfast, all right? You need to have protein. Lower protein can decrease test scores by 30%. That can be the difference between passing an exam or failing it. Only 2% of children eat the USDA recommendations of 5 servings of fruits and vegetables. That's for kids. For adults, it's actually closer to 9. And only 2% of adults eat it, by the way. And I know those recommendations change, but we're seeing that most kids don't. And some of the foods on the market aren't fruit. This was interesting. As I was preparing for this, I came across this study done in Britain with 14,000 children. Fast food lowered IQ in these children by 5 or 6 points. Now, that might not sound a lot, but look at the correlation. Fast food directly impacted a child's ability to think and learn. And they were just eating one fast food meal a week. Artificial colors, sweeteners, and preservatives can affect behavior and cognitive performance in sensitive children. I know that a lot of times in our culture, we're seeing this thing where if you talk about artificial colors and sweeteners, people say, we were fine. When we ate it, we were fine. Well, maybe they weren't fine, by the way. But in sensitive kids, it's a real issue. All right, there are some kids, it doesn't seem to bother them, but it's pretty good to avoid those as you can. The importance of breakfast in this school and in Indiana, they said our teachers have seen students more alert and engaged in their classrooms and are less worried about hunger. Academics have improved and behavior problems have gone down. And we feel that breakfast in the classroom is the daily start to that success. I'm not here arguing for whether or not schools should take over the function of feeding your kids breakfast. We know that some kids don't get breakfast. And that school might be the only place that they do that. Overall, I just wanted to have this here to show you that breakfast really is one of the more important meals of the day. And make sure it's balanced with good protein and a lot of the food groups. I'd like you to meet Fluffy and Scruffy. We're going to talk about synthetic versus real food. A lot of what we buy in the grocery store is not real food. Fluffy was fed a diet of real eggs. That's the healthy rat. Scruffy was fed a diet of egg beaters. Egg beaters aren't real food. Okay. So for your kids, What does this mean? Fruit drinks are flavored sugar water. You have to be careful with the label. A fruit drink is not fruit juice. All right? Fruit roll-ups are not fruit, especially they've got a lot of sugar and some artificial colors in them. You can actually make, it's called fruit leather, pretty easily. Maybe you've got fruit that your kids, for whatever reason, just aren't eating it, and you've got to use it up. Lightly cook it, spread it out on a cookie sheet with maybe some parchment paper, heat it on a low oven, about 170 degrees, and you can, for several hours, and it'll dry up and make like a fruit leather, and then you can cut it up in strips and roll it, make your own homemade fruit roll-ups. Or I have a dehydrator. I make mine with a dehydrator. Lunchables are not real cheese. It doesn't rot. I bought a Lunchable. My kids got really excited. She's like, woohoo, we're getting Lunchables. I'm like, this is not for you. And isn't it interesting that those Lunchables are actually sold in the stores at the same, what I call eye height as your kids. Anyway, I took this Lunchable and I had it for 9 months. Probably should have still kept it. But I abused it. I kept it in a hot car over the summer. I never refrigerated it. And at the end of 9 months, that cheese never molded. The corners curled up, were a little dry, but there was no mold. The meat was a little gray. Crackers were completely untouched. Lunchables is not food, okay? Happy Meals don't rot either. Just have a fun experiment. I know your kids will get excited. Go buy one of the kids' meals at your local fast food restaurant and just let it sit out. And you'll find the buns don't rot. The meat doesn't change color. It just kind of dries up a little bit. And the French fries don't rot either. And as Dr. Shacker used to say, if food doesn't rot, don't eat it. But eat it before the bugs get it. Right? You have 2 brains. Oh, we just did all this stuff on one brain. Let's talk about our other brain. It's called the enteric nervous system. As you can see in the picture, it's in your gut. And you have over 100 million neurons. I mean, we have 1 trillion cells in our body. It's absolutely amazing how we were created. So you have 1 million neurons. 40 neurotransmitters are made in your small intestine. Now, likely they'll find that there's more. But right now, 40. Your gut makes its own decision. Do you ever get a gut feeling about something? That's your enteric nervous system telling you something. When you're upset, you get an upset stomach. 95% of your body's serotonin is in your gut. That's where it's made, along with 50% of your dopamine. And again, these other neurotransmitters. Your gut actually communicates directly through your brain. Look here in this, I'm going to follow my cursor. This is something called the vagus nerve. And you see how there's several connections with it. And the vagus nerve takes the neurotransmitters and transfer up the spinal column into your brain. It's kind of how it works. So a healthy gut is absolutely key to a healthy brain. And what's really interesting is for years, holistic practitioners, this would be naturopaths, homeopaths, chiropractors, holistic nutritionists, would often have somebody work on rebuilding their gut and detoxifying as one of the first steps to reclaiming their health. And often, without realizing it, they were improving the health of the enteric nervous system. Now we know a lot about gut-brain axis and those kinds of things. But your gut brain can say no to your big brain. Listen to your gut. It's right more often than you think. All right, what are some simple steps? We've talked about some pretty complicated things with neurotransmitters and amino acids. And I almost knocked my water over. Let's talk about some simple steps. First, switch to whole foods. These can be pre-cooked for you for your convenience. So if you're making a big batch of whole grain rice, not white, whole grain rice, cut that batch in half, double up the batch, freeze half or dehydrate half. And then you've got it for the next time, for example. That's a great way to do it. You can do that with oatmeal too, by the way. Reduce or eliminate artificial foods, sweeteners, and additives. In my family, I started with one called hydrogenated fats because that was a really a carcinogenic, means cause cancer, fat, really negative on brain health and really increased inflammation in the body. So that was the first one. So you might pick one ingredient like hydrogenated oils, which you'll find in a lot of boxed foods. Crisco's hydrogenated oil, for example, and just get rid of that. All right, we've switched to natural peanut butter, natural almond butter. pack a lunch and not use the school lunch. Now, some of your schools might have a healthy lunch. This is something you can involve your child in, and packing their own lunches. Water instead of juice boxes. Make juice boxes a treat. Get the kids outside. I know that sometimes we're concerned about their safety outside in terms of strangers and all that. Mom, you might have to go outside as well. Get the kids outside more. I mean, do you remember, some of us remember where our moms would kick us out in the morning. We weren't supposed to come home till in the evening, right? Encourage sports. This doesn't necessarily mean that your child has to be in competitive sports, but the gameplay and the sports are really good for social connections, physical activity, brain health. Healthy snacks. You might need to, a lot of times when you're looking up for healthy snacks, you see a lot, like the Dairy Association wrote all the snacks, right? You'll see a lot with cheese and wheat on variations on that kind of thing. And some kids have real dairy sensitivities and wheat sensitivities. So come up with your kids, a list of snacks. You might want to have those already pre-bagged, maybe Saturday morning. You make up the snacks for the week and pre-bag them and put them in so the kids can just go grab them. Clean, non-toxic environment. We'll talk about why that's important in just a second. Reduce media. They really, I have such mixed feelings about these e-readers. I use them too, but I like real books. You actually retain more information from a real book, right, than a digital book. And media has some negative effects on brain health and sleep. So make sure you cut off media for adults too, about an hour before you go to bed. Increase family and social connections. Dinner together, hanging out together, doing chores together, hugs, stories. Reading, by the way, reading a story out loud to your child, you can read a story 2 to 3 grade levels above what they can read themselves. So you can read a much more complicated story. And really simple ways, doesn't take a lot of money. All of these will not only improve family life, will improve brain health and overall health as well. Let's talk a little bit about environment. How does that affect the brain? Well, home life. New research shows that negative environments can actually affect the brain's shape. That's those neural connections, those synapses. And in trauma, for example, the executive function of the brain during the traumatic event, brain scans have shown that it actually can almost like flatten. It'll come back a little bit, but it flattens during trauma. Positive homes shape brains as well. Chemical load. Children in more polluted environments are more likely to exhibit autistic type or aggressive behavior. They are not getting, I did not say they are autistic, but you see that type of behavior. We've had children that behaved autistically and got them on a nutrition program with Shackley, cleaned up the environment, and these kids could speak again in sometimes just a few weeks. So were they really autistic? We have another story real quick about, I'll share that story in a bit. Let's get through this. Air, cognitive function. Poor air quality decreases cognitive skills by 30%. And we know this because they're measuring the effects when children are being tested. Water, very important. Good, clean water for nutrient distribution and brain function. Your brain, if you're dehydrated, you're not getting enough water, coffee isn't water, soda isn't water, fruit juice isn't water, your brain function will decline. And we just talked about media. You see a decline in alpha waves. And you can see this when your child is watching TV or playing a video game and they're like this. The alpha waves, brain goes to sleep. And sometimes kids will become aggressive after playing console games. And it's not because the game was necessarily aggressive in and of itself. It's because the brain waves were asleep. And let's take a look at chemical load in environment. This comes from Dr. Doris Rapp's book. She was a pediatric allergist, and she wrote the book, Is This Your Child? And also, Is This Your Child's World? And she wrote those in the 90s. And they did a school air allergy test. So they had the room aired out and the desks clean. And they took writing samples with Edward, Ryan, and Sean. Look at Edward's handwriting. They wiped the desks down with the disinfectant that they normally use, could have been bleach. And look at him. He can barely write. He is withdrawn. He is throwing toys. He has a headache. Does he need detention? Is he going to get a disciplinary note from mom to mom? They took Edward out, aired out the room. He comes back in. His handwriting still hasn't completely recovered, but his behavior is appropriate now. Let's look at Ryan. During disinfectant exposure, he's whining, he's crying, he's tired. Oh. Is he a spoiled, argumentative kid? Look at the peak of disinfectant exposure. He refuses to write. Is he being stubborn? His behavior is now brain-driven and affected directly by the environment. And then after exposure, Ryan's handwriting returns to normal. Look at Sean at the bottom. During the test, Sean looks dyslexic. Does he need an IEP or does he need a clean environment? How many kids are wrongly identified as having issues? And it's their environment, it's not their brain. Their brain is being affected negatively. And then after the test, Sean's handwriting returns to normal. So a cleaner environment is actually easier to get than you think. You can use Get Clean. We had, when I first did Better Brains, Better Kids, I was working with a woman who owned a school, and she worked with babies who were fetal alcohol syndrome baby. Mama drank. Mama was an alcoholic during pregnancy, or crack babies. Babies whose moms used drugs and cocaine during pregnancy. And in the case of one of these children, for a while we were getting the parents to switch to Get Clean. Stop using their chemical products and use the Get Clean. In one case, in just 4 days, this child came off its medication. 4 days with Get Clean. What a profound change in that child's life. We had another case where, another situation in Shackley, where a child was bouncing off the walls, throwing cereal, just aggressive, angry, out of control, unresponsive to discipline, couldn't sit still for a story, couldn't sit still to draw, just agitated the whole time. And the parents are at their wits' end. This child needed 2 adults in the home at all times. It's kind of tough. And so you can imagine now the stress on the marriage and everything with this. Well, the child's step-grandmother was a Shackley distributor, and she kept telling Mama, you need to switch products. You need to switch products. You need to switch products. And eventually, to keep peace in the family, Mom agreed. And she got a Get Clean kit and stopped using, she was using something called Top Job, stopped using her cleaners, started cleaning with Get Clean. Within a matter of days, the child was sitting still, listening to stories, coloring peacefully, no longer a behavior problem. I mean, what a huge difference for this child and this family. Mom thought it was a phase. After a few months, she ran out of some of her products, and she said, well, it was just a phase. He's better now. He's older. And she went and brought out, she didn't throw them out. She brought out the products she was using. And within a matter of hours, this child was bouncing off the walls again, and the very destructive behavior returned. Mom used only Shackley Get Clean from that point forward. And as they understood this more, they realized that this child would act out in church. So they brought the church the cleaning products and said, please use these. So there's an example of a child who was chemically sensitive. With the Get Clean kit, you ask the person who sent you to this webinar about Get Clean, you will save up to $3,000 a year over other brands, including the eco brands. It's very easy to use, very concentrated, very flexible. It's safe for your children. It also lowers cancer risks. It's been shown that in more than one study that breast cancer risk in women is increased by exposure to toxins in their environment. So let's lower toxin load and lower our cancer risks, lowers asthma risk, allergy risks, other brain health issues. It's also safe for pets. Pets and children are susceptible because of the way they metabolize and their size. They're just not physically as big as adults. Your kids can clean. Now, they might not be so happy when you get clean, because now they can do the chores. They can wash the windows. They can wash the bathrooms, right? There you go. Let's talk about choosing supplements, because like we said, only 2% of children actually eat 5 to... Is your kid eating 5 servings of vegetables a day? Maybe they're in the chicken nugget phase, right? And the same thing for an adult. So when you're choosing vitamins, you don't want anything artificial. There's absolutely no need for it. You don't want any aspartame. Aspartame may be a neurotoxin, and some studies, or rather some researchers are thinking it's implicated in multiple sclerosis. You don't need any sugar, especially not the kind of sugar they put in these. You want natural, not synthetic ingredients. Your body can distinguish between a natural nutrient and something that's synthetic. It's clinically proven. A lot of manufacturers do not take the effort to prove that their supplements are absorbed and utilized by the body. That's very expensive testing to do. Is it live enzyme? When you eat, for example, raw fruits and vegetables, and they're fresh, there are live enzymes in them that your body uses. So do your supplements, are they also live enzyme? And do you have adequate calcium, B vitamins, and trace minerals? Calcium as a molecule is bulky. It's hard to get into a tablet. That's why sometimes calcium tablets are like huge, right? So a lot of times companies just won't put as much calcium in to keep the tablet a certain size. B vitamins, some of the B vitamins are really cheap. And so companies, one strategy that they use a lot of times is to overload on riboflavin and niacin, for example, and thiamine. If you're seeing a lot of cheap B vitamins and not a lot of, like, for example, biotin, which is very expensive, you're looking at a company that chose to not go there. Trace minerals. Trace minerals, some of them can be expensive, and you don't need many. It's why they're called trace. But there are certain chemical reactions that need to happen in your body, right? Your gut making all those things that your immune system chemicals, neurotransmitters, hormones, all that kind of stuff, that won't happen if you don't have certain trace minerals. So trace minerals are very important. Now, why would you choose Shaklee? Well, they do 83,000 lab tests for quality and performed each year on Shaklee products. But wait, there's more. I love saying that. 176 separate tests for purity, freshness, potency, and safety on raw ingredients. This is more than the USP requires. They test for over 350 contaminants. The USP is only like about 190, I think. So there are more than 262 separate quality tests throughout manufacturing. So when the products come in, when the raw materials come in, if they've passed these tests for this 176 tests, they don't pass, those materials are sold on the secondary market and other companies buy, which Shaklee rejects. You might want to make a note of that. So after it's passed all these tests, when it's in the process of being manufactured for you to eat, it goes through separate quality tests again and again and again to make sure that nothing negative or harmful has been introduced in the manufacturing process. And Shaklee audits its manufacturers. Clinical testing that proves that it works, that it's absorbed, that if it's supposed to have a predictive outcome, like improved cognition, that happens. The bottom line is quality determines results. This is not where you want to go cheap, all right? So why Shaklee then? To sum it up, it's always safe. It is always green. We introduced non-toxic cleaners in 1960 when the rest of the world was, doing better living through chemistry, right? And yes, green products, chemistry is, it's anything, but there was a lot of emphasis on synthetic. And Shaklee was green from the very beginning. We actually helped to create what they call that market space. It's always natural. Dr. Shaklee always believed that there was a wisdom in how we were created and a wisdom in the way nature was organized, and that it always had to be respected, and that it always works. You can have something that's natural and it doesn't work, so it also has to work. And an example here is there's no bisphenol A, that's BPA. Now people know about it, but when it first was discovered that it was a carcinogen, a lot of companies were scrambling to get the BPA out of their toys and out of their the bottles and packaging. Shaklee was always concerned about BPA, and here's an example of where they're looking out for your benefit before you even know that they need to. And it was not in even in our personal care products. It was never in our cleaning product bottles. We never in our water pitchers. We never, ever used any BPA. And so none of it leached in our products. None of our clients were ever at risk from anything they purchased from Shaklee. All right, let's look at this. This is a really powerful example. This is the writing of a 10-year-old girl. Does she look like she's 10 on the left side? She's diagnosed with ADD. She's from Lansing, Michigan. And then on the right, look at her handwriting 1 week after starting on a Shaklee supplement program of protein, Vital E, and D complex. Look at the difference in brain function. What do you think her self-esteem is like now? ADD children know. She knew on the left that she wasn't writing, that she couldn't write like the other kids. She knew it. She knew that she was frustrating her teacher. She was probably frustrating herself because she could see it, but not know how to make it, right? And then look at the right side. Look what the teacher wrote. This is much, much better. I don't know if the teacher knew what was happening, but that's the difference that you can make for your child. So what are some choices that you can make for kids? I love Life Shake. Life Shake is a complete meal. It is 16 grams of non-GMO soy protein and just a little bit of word about soy protein. It's gotten some undeserved bad press. Soy protein has got all the balanced amino acids. It also has probiotics for that gut health for your second brain, and omega-3s for both your brains. The other thing to know about the soy protein is it does have some anti-nutrients in it that Shaklee water washes off. So a lot of the criticisms about soy, Shaklee addressed and has always addressed. It's not new for us. It's how we've done it from the beginning. And so that's why I think a lot of people can use our soy and get the good benefits. Soy is very protective in a lot of ways. That would be another webinar. But our soy is safe and effective. You can put Life Shake in pancakes, oatmeal, smoothies, make protein bars with it, anything. This protein, it'll help you, help your child and you improve neurotransmitter health, improve muscle tone, improve immunity. If you're deficient in an amino acid, you're more likely your immune system lowers. It helps balance that blood sugar, so you've got that steady stream of nutrients going into the brain. It'll increase bone strength. There's some calcium in it, but also the protein and the calcium work together to increase bone strength. Extra protein reduces lethargy and aggression. Remember, we talked about how when the brain's not getting its energy, it's not communicating well. And Shaklee is always GMO-free and beyond organic. We just talked about that with some of the tests. What about Incredivites? What about a multivitamin for kids? Incredivites is an excellent choice. It covers the gaps for kids with 23 vitamins and minerals. It's sweetened with mannitol and xylitol. It's actually good for teeth, especially xylitol helps feed the good bacteria in your mouth, and the bad bacteria don't like it. So it's sweetened in a way that does not negatively impact blood sugar or cause cavities. It has a compound called lactoferrin. It's derived from, I believe, colostrum from cows, and that improves immunity. So it's got some targeted immune system development. 600 IU of vitamin D. You keep hearing about vitamin D, don't you? And that's important for brain health. It's important for hormonal health. It's important for immune system health. It's important for bone health. And the Incredivites have more calcium for bone health than famous brands. And so that's not only important for bone, but also muscles and muscle contraction like your heart. And your central nervous system needs a good amount of calcium. For older children and teens or any child who can swallow tablets comfortably, you can use Vital E, which is for adults, but kids can use it very successfully. It's got a little bit more nutrients than the Incredivites and or the Vitalizer. It has trace minerals for body function. We talked about that. If you really can't use, for whatever reason, the Incredivites, we have a couple of options with CitraBoost, which can be incorporated into food, or Liquid E, which is a really good way to bring up iron. It's got a lot of iron and B vitamins in it. All of Shaklee products are gluten-free. The Incredivites also have all 8 B vitamins in proper ratio for a good central nervous system function. And if your child is dairy sensitive or you prefer kosher, we recommend the Ocean Wonders by Shaklee. Now, how about feeding your second brain? Optiflora. Well, one of the things when you've got good gut, healthy gut, you're going to have regular bowels. The Optiflora has 250 million colony-forming units. That's what CFU is. It means it helps them grow. Each of something called bifidus and acidophilus. There's a lot of good guy bacteria and a lot of bad guy bacteria. These are the two of the big ones and seem to have a direct correlation with neurotransmitters. A healthy gut increases your immune system. Remember, it's your body's factory. It increases nutrient absorption. It increases the health of neurotransmitters. A healthy gut makes better neurotransmitters, healthy cells, build healthy cells. It protects against digestive disorders. And the Life Shake has different probiotic strands than Optiflora, so they're very good complements to each other. B complex, again, all 8 B vitamins in balanced ratio to each other. Very important. Very important for central nervous system development. Hormonal balance, PMS, okay. That will help your children navigate puberty a lot better. You'll be happier. Balances blood sugar, so there's less moodiness. Brain, very important for brain health and brain function, pollution protection, and immune system. And speaking about this blood sugar, I had a child who had a very long day. We homeschooled for most of our lives, but sometimes I would have them in conventional education. And I had a child who was in a specialized magnet school. And so this child had 2 extra bus rides. They had to leave at 7 in the morning to get to school by 8:30. Then they would get home at like 4:30, 5 o'clock. So a very, very long day. And when this child would come home, super grumpy. So I would greet the child at the door with a protein shake, B complex, calcium, and stress relief complex. And I'd say, you can come into the house when you take this. Take the vitamins, take the protein, stomp up the stairs, and come down 20 minutes. Sweet and wonderful. Just saying. Okay. Happier kids, right? It improves focus and decreases anxiety because the central nervous system is being fed. And we've sometimes heard about folic acid and folate and absorption. Well, Shaklee has a special folic acid coating, which increases absorption. One of the things I love about Shaklee is they think about everything. So fish oil is pretty yummy, right? I was actually kind of being silly. The omega-3s are an Omega Guard and the Mighty Smart. The Mighty Smart is an orange chewable square. And the Omega Guard, now some of my children and some of the children of my clients are willing to chew the Omega Guard. It's actually got a little bit more of the omegas in it than the Mighty Smart, but it's about getting it into them the best way possible. And one of my children would chew the Omega Guard, and to this day loves fish. It's okay. One day ate the entire bag of Mighty Smart. So omega-3s have been shown to increase intelligence. I'm not saying directly Omega Guard. I'm not making that claim for Omega Guard, but Omega Guard and Mighty Smart, we know they get absorbed, and omega-3s are being studied in increasing intelligence, decreasing aggression, increasing concentration. This is how important omega-3s are. Decreasing anxiety and depression, and in fact, neuroscientists and psychiatrists and psychologists are looking at treating schizophrenia and depression with therapeutic levels of omega-3s. It can also help with allergies and immune system health, inflammation, and skin disorders. I've helped a lot of people who've had eczema with the Optiflora and the Omega Guard. And I think what you're seeing here is you think you're just dealing with brain health, but when you're doing a holistic approach, you get multiple benefits. The Shaklee uses very small fish because the further you go up the food chain, the more the toxins are concentrated. So they actually fish in the least populated waters in the world and use the smallest fish, and then triple molecular distillation for 0 toxins. They are going for parts per billion in purity. That's like 1 grain of sand in a swimming pool. Lecithin, from the Greek word lekithos, I think I said that right, it comes out of the egg yolk. It contains this really long word. Sometimes unpronounceable words are very good for you to eat. It is the most abundant component of cells. It helps promote myelin sheath development. Myelin sheath is the, think of like, pretend this is like a nerve cell, and the myelin sheath is a coating. It's like a cuticle on your nail, protects your nail. That's what the myelin sheath does. It protects the nerves. Some kids who have trouble reading, their myelin sheath isn't completed development. That's why they couldn't maybe read at 6, but they're reading fine at 8. Might have been a myelin sheath issue. Multiple sclerosis may be an issue of demyelinating or the myelin sheath coming off the nerve. All right, so lecithin is really important for promoting myelin sheath health. It supports memory. I noticed a big improvement when I took lecithin. Supports mood. It's also being studied for the improvement in cognitive function. Again, it helps make that acetylcholine, that one we talked about for neurotransmitter that was for muscle and brain health. You can take the lecithin to help improve that neurotransmitter, and helps your body metabolize fat more efficiently. That would include the healthy fats. What are some snack choices? Kids don't eat regular meals all the time, do they? So you want to keep their blood sugar stable throughout the day, and that helps mood and brain health, and you're going to have happier kids if their blood sugar is stable. But I know we're busy, right? We need it simple. So you could do the Shaklee Life Shake. ESP is energizing soy protein, or the meal shake. Just make them a smoothie. We have lots. Your Shaklee consultant has a huge amount of recipes to give you, and some actually can be remarkably similar to Girl Scout cookie taste. We also have in the 180 food line, so we have snack bars that are maybe just this big, maybe 120 calories, but 9 grams of good protein, good balanced protein. And our snack chips are gluten-free, and they even have protein. If you're giving your kids want something snacky and crunchy, you give them potato chips, there's like no protein. There's a whole lot of negatives with it. But our snack chips are actually a really good snack choice. You can put some citrus and applesauce or juice. And the organic greens booster. Now, I know a lot of your kids are going, Mom, we love kale, bring out the kale chips. But the organic greens booster is a combination of spinach, kale, and broccoli. And I don't know how they made it. It's zero heavy metals, right? The parts per billion thing, 0 heavy metals. And 1 small scoop, I measured it, it's less than a tablespoon, is like a cup of vegetables, and you can barely taste it. So if your kids love broccoli, they'll love it. It's got a little bit of a broccoli taste. But if you don't, throw in an apple or a little bit of lemon juice, takes care of it. And you can put this in any of their foods. If you're having spaghetti, I'd put some organic greens booster, stir it up, get it into their spaghetti, get it into their smoothies, maybe even in their protein balls. And the Shaklee fast food, the meal bars. I know a lot of times we're busy, we're getting kids out to practice and whatever other activities they've got. And instead of going through the drive-through, take a box of meal bars. I actually keep meal bars and snack bars in the glove compartment of my car. I keep them in my car because sometimes we just, in an ADD household, we sometimes don't plan as well as we could. And so I've got the fast food there. It's healthier and less expensive. Special times, stress relief complex. You guys have been great, by the way. We're almost wrapping up, but I couldn't not talk about brain health without talking about 3 very special products. Stress relief complex is, saved our life in some ways. It helps you focus, it keeps you calm, and it negates in your body, it blocks the negative action of stress. For young children, they don't want to go to the dentist, right? It's scary, they're all irritated. Just crush them up and put it in applesauce or pudding or something that's easy, and a thing of yogurt, give it to them. But test anxiety, or your child's got to audition for a play or choir or band or something, give it to them. You might want to take it. Sometimes I take it myself at night before because my brain won't turn off. Gentle Sleep Complex. This is valerian and passion flower. It's a great herb for kids. It's a little bit stinky, but that's okay. You can get it into them, and it helps the body calm down and allows you to go to sleep. It doesn't make you go to sleep, but allows you to calm down and go to sleep. So sometimes you can take this if you're just irritated and edgy and you've done all your other tricks. Gentle Sleep Complex might be a good choice. MindWorks. I love this product. As somebody who has ADD, made all the difference for me. I medicated for just a couple of years. I prefer to manage my ADD naturally. MindWorks increases cognition, clinically proven to decrease brain shrinkage. I have a member of my family who's 5 years old and has ADD. And when this child's ADD is kicking in, you can just literally watch this child become nonverbal, gets all sing-songy, he's trying to stimulate himself, and he completely loses focus. You cannot reach him. You call his name. He's not responsive because he's on a mind trip. We'll give him just a half tablet of MindWorks. And within 20 minutes, it's like he's back and he's talking and he's asking things and he's focusing again. And the sing-songy behavior is gone. So, because it's not playful childhood singing, it's nonverbal singing. So MindWorks is not really rated for kids, but a lot of us do give it to children. That's going to be a personal decision. You might have that conversation with your Shaklee consultant. But I love MindWorks. We've seen kids take the MindWorks and see immediate improvement in grades and school performance. So really talk to your Shaklee person about that. All right, let's wrap it up and put it together. Again, you've been phenomenal to stay with me. We've gone through a whole lot of information. So back to basics. Start your child right. Eat whole foods, unprocessed as much as possible. Drink water. For supplements, Optiflora. It's very, very tiny. I'm trying to find like an example. Like you see that little tip of my pen? It's smaller than that. So it's a very small, about that size. It's a very small little pearl. Incredivites, get some Life Shaker protein, one of our protein choices, and absolutely Omega Guard or Mighty Smart. For teens, Vitalizer, it also has that probiotic for gut and brain health, and very easy to take. I'm going to tell you something, as a mom who's had teenagers. You get your kids on a supplement program and you lower the toxic threshold and you get this protein, you're going to have nicer teenagers. Then teenage years will be a whole lot more smooth because your kids, their development and that pruning that's going on, you are supporting their brain function through that. So nicer through puberty, nicer through all those hormonal changes, less acne, a lot of reasons to do this. Happier mom and dad, okay? And a safer environment for developing brains. Get clean, save some money, support our planet, and support your family's health. So remember, good health. I know we've gone into some details, but good health is really simple. We just talked about a few simple steps. Switch to safety where you Shaklee for safety, purity, and potency with your supplements. Eat less processed food. It's a journey, but get started. Eat more fruits and veggies. Find lots of ways to incorporate those. Exercise, you too, right? More sleep, less media. Our culture is sleep deprived, so part of that's the media. And drink more fresh water to get those nutrients into the brain. So connect with us. You might be watching this in our wellness project, but ask your Shaklee person to join their Facebook group. A lot of us have VIP groups. We talk about these kinds of issues in health, and it's part of our community. We welcome you to join us. Ask about our wellness project. The Wellness Project is a huge resource. This presentation's there, as well as others on vitamin E, and pages and pages and pages of information. So it's a wealthy resource for you. And I encourage you to subscribe to our Vitality for Life newsletter. It goes out once a month and some updates in between once a week. A lot of good research material in an easy to read and understand format. So I want to thank you again for joining me. You've been phenomenal. I did get a couple questions that I'd like to address right away. Yes, to repeat, Vitally for adults can be taken by children as soon as they can swallow. The nutrient needs are great, so that is up to you. The protein tastes awesome, and you can get a lot of recipes and a lot of ways to use that. In fact, sometimes I'll make up my smoothie mixes, like my little recipes, in little like sandwich bags, and then I put them in the freezer and I've got them good to go. And yes, there is a membership. If you really can, if what we talked about really aligned with your values, you can become a Shaklee member. Certain product packages, there's no charge for membership. Otherwise than that, it's $19.95. And we are looking for people to partner with us because we need to help spread the word and help educate Americans on their choices. So thank you again for joining me. You have been a pleasure, and stay healthy and enjoy life. Bye-bye now.